Hi, I'm Sammy Murrian. This is a movie review from Rehab. My channel is called Movie Reviews from Rehab. I have nothing to hide. I don't play a character on my channel. This is my real life. I am a recovering drug addict. So I'm very frank about the trials and tribulations of being a drug addict and what I experience from day to day in recovery. I've been in recovery for just about exactly a year now. One thing that I have really struggled with in recovery, one thing that I've really struggled with my whole life is anxiety. It is really, really bad. It's a really bad idea for me to be bored. If I'm not actively engaged in something, really using my attention span on something, I get into trouble. My mind goes into bad places. So on paper, it might seem like going to see a documentary isn't the best idea for me. Documentaries are often given the rap of being super boring. For me, personally, boredom is hazardous. Accepting the risk of being bored in a documentary, I went to go see this one a couple of nights ago, and I have to report that I just saw a documentary, and it is one of the most entertaining films of the year. Why, might you ask? Well, that's in the title. It's De Palma. This is a new documentary about Brian De Palma. This is a documentary by Jake Paltrow and Noah Baumbach, filmmakers themselves, about the work of Brian De Palma. On paper, the description of this film might sound super boring. This film is literally one interview with Brian De Palma, filmed flat, just like I'm on screen right now. It's just this one medium close-up shot interview with Brian De Palma that looks like it was shot in one day, talking about his career with a bunch of clips from his movies. Now, one single interview and a whole bunch of clips may seem like a fairly uninspired, flat idea for a feature film in theaters. I have to tell you though, this movie is a treat. This is a treat for film lovers. This movie just felt like a total treat. This is an intimate and personal, very frank conversation with Brian De Palma. It turns out that Brian De Palma himself is like the most wonderful subject for an interview film. He is marvelous company to be around for 2 hours. Despite being one of the most notorious and iconic filmmakers in contemporary film, he is so real and down to earth. He's in this wonderful place of not being overly modest. He's not like, there's no false modesty with Brian De Palma. He's also not full of himself. There's no gross ego. Some of his movies are absolutely great. He knows they're absolutely great. Some of his movies didn't work. He knows they didn't work, and he talks about why. Noah Baumbach and Jake Paltrow, who are both, really established filmmakers in their own right, obviously believe that Brian De Palma is a great filmmaker. And they get this really, really remarkable conversation out of him. I believe that this film was shot in one day. This one interview with Brian De Palma was shot in one day, and then video clips were inserted around him talking. And like I said, let me reinforce, this is one of the most entertaining films of the year. A big part of that is because Brian De Palma himself is such an entertaining figure. He's larger than life, and yet he's completely grounded. He's hilarious too. And the rest of the movie is clips from Brian De Palma's movies, and I can't think of a filmmaker who has made more entertaining films than Brian De Palma. Brian De Palma is of course known, frequently associated with very stylish movies, often lurid, controversial movies. He has made about a bajillion movies, roughly 1 bajillion movies. I had forgotten how many movies Brian De Palma has directed in his career, and It is 1 bajillion. It is exactly 1 bajillion. And this film is a retrospective over every single film he's ever made. Just a few examples of some of my favorite Brian De Palma films. Blowout from 1981 is today largely, widely considered to be Brian De Palma's masterpiece. I won't argue with that. It is a truly great film. It was not successful upon its release because it had a sad, downbeat ending. Dressed to Kill is a movie that really upset people when it came out in the 1980s. This is one of Brian De Palma's many tributes to Hitchcock that he created in his lifetime. Hitchcock was his idol. Dressed to Kill was so violent and in its day was seen as so sexist, it's not sexist, that audiences threw red paint at the screen. Dressed to Kill was clearly ahead of its time. It's more of a comedy than a thriller. Body Double is another one of my absolute favorite Brian De Palma films. I love Body Double, and it was reviled in its day for being, once again, sexist, misogynistic. It's not. To clarify, Brian De Palma's movies are not sexist. I said that several times. I'm going to say it again. Brian De Palma's movies are not sexist. Yeah, Body Double was just hated in its day, and it flopped. Most critics hated it, not the good ones like Roger Ebert and Pauline Kael. They loved it because they had brains and they could recognize vision when they saw it, and they didn't just, go with a gut reaction of, ugh. Body Double is a very violent film. There's a lot of violence against women in Body Double. That doesn't inherently make it a sexist film. Brian De Palma speaks in this documentary about how his films have always really made people angry. They've made people furious. People protest his movies. People write about how disgusting and lurid and trashy and sadistic and gross his movies are. I love that about Brian De Palma. He is such a visionary and he's such an artist. He's never backed down. He's never backed down from the censors ever. Scarface is an example of that. Scarface is not one of my favorite Brian De Palma films, though I really do respect it as a film. And that film was originally released with an X rating because Brian De Palma just did not back down from the censors. He completely believed in his vision and wouldn't accept anything less. So many filmmakers, great filmmakers, over the course of time have allowed themselves to be bullied. Bullied by the MPAA ratings board, bullied by studio heads, bullied by actors, bullied by producers, bullied by audiences. So many filmmakers, including great filmmakers, have allowed their vision and their art to be compromised by bullies who don't like their art and don't recognize their vision. Brian De Palma is not one of those directors. Brian De Palma has maintained 100% artistic integrity throughout his entire career, and that is definitely something that was reinforced in my brain watching this documentary, and one of the reasons that I just adore Brian De Palma and I consider him to be one of the finest filmmakers of all time. My personal favorite Brian De Palma film of all time is Carrie. Carrie is one of my, it's probably my top 10 favorite films of all time. Carrie is one of the most purely cinematic horror films ever. One of the most purely cinematic visions of horror I've ever seen. If you haven't seen Brian De Palma's 1976 Carrie recently, do watch it now. In fact, just stop listening to me and come back and finish this later. Carrie is so remarkable. Every single scene in Carrie is super bold stylistically. Every scene in Carrie, there is a very ostentatious and ambitious, risky stylistic choice being made, whether it's split screen, sped up or sped down video, long takes, audio manipulation. Every scene in Carrie is so stylish and so not naturalistic. Every single scene in Carrie, those stylistic choices serve the film. They serve a purpose and they make the film better. So often, directors get carried away with their vision and get really stylish just for the sake of being stylish. And it's frustrating. Anyone who has an interest in film should look at Carrie as this shining example of the power of the language of film and the choices that a director makes in making a film. Carrie, of course, after the 1976 film, has been remade 1.5 million times, including a Broadway musical. There are clips from that Broadway musical in De Palma, and it's hilarious. The audience I was with laughed out loud. Several remakes of Carrie over the years. There was one just a few years ago by Kimberly Pierce. There have been television remakes. One of the joys of this film, of De Palma, is listening to Brian De Palma talk about how much those remakes sucked because the directors of those films made choices that Brian De Palma actively did not make in making his film. Like I said, he's not full of himself. He's not this, egotistical man despite his enormous accomplishments in his career. He also takes no prisoners when talking about the remakes of Carrie and just why they are so terrible and why he was so right and they are so wrong. I loved that about De Palma. There's a part of me that wants to just straight up tell you, my viewers, that De Palma is required viewing for anyone who has an interest in filmmaking. This feels like a masterclass in filmmaking and the film industry. De Palma, in all of his wonderful earthiness, offers advice on what he thinks benefited him in being a director. He says you need to literally be incredibly strong. Obviously, you must be super strong to be a filmmaker, to be a director, to put up with that level of work. Brian De Palma himself, in case you don't know, has the build of a Jeep. He's just this absolutely gigantic box of a man. He makes this wonderful remark about how directors don't have plans for their body of work. They don't start out with, oh, this is what my career will look like. It's never like that. Directors make a film, that goes well, they make another film, another project. There's no divine plan. That's just not how it works. I was a huge fan of Brian De Palma going into this film. I was entertained into submission watching this movie, and I am a much bigger fan of Brian De Palma after having seen this film. I'm re-upping on all of his classics. This idea, the filmmaking style here is so simple. What Noah Baumbach and Jake Paltrow were doing, just interviewing Brian De Palma and showing clips from his movies, it seems so obvious. The effect is extraordinary, and I hope it would be amazing. It would be absolutely amazing if Baumbach and Paltrow could get the contemporaries of Brian De Palma from back in the 70s to do retrospectives like this too. How amazing would it be to get a theatrical retrospective film like this with Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, Paul Schrader. I hesitate to say George Lucas. George Lucas could talk about like 3 movies, and then we could just have like an intermission for a couple hours. Or a George Lucas retrospective could be a cautionary tale. The only tiny problem that I had with De Palma goes against a problem that I usually have with movies. I thought this movie was too short. This movie runs about 108 minutes. 2.5 hours would have been fine. I honestly I would have enjoyed a 3-hour De Palma documentary going deeper into each of these films with more clips, more stories from behind the scenes. That idea would have translated well to like TV, maybe like a little mini-series on HBO or something. The idea of a Brian De Palma retrospective being on television, seems like it, could be a good idea. The only problem with that is that Brian De Palma himself hates television. He's a complete elitist snob who thinks that television is inferior to cinema. He is famously quoted as saying television is nothing but shots of people talking to each other, which I think is hilarious. I'm a film elitist too. I'm a cinema elitist too. And I am so happy that I saw this in a theater. I highly recommend seeking this out in a theater because seeing these stunning De Palma images on a giant screen was just something else for me. Seeing images from Carrie that I have held so dear in my heart my whole life. I've seen that movie a million times. I've never seen it on a big screen. Seeing clips from that film, images that I have burned into my mind for the rest of my life, finally seeing them on a huge screen, that alone is worth the price of admission. Seek this movie out. Try to see it in a theater because it's fabulous. I'm giving De Palma an A. This is like the 40th A that I have given to a film in 2016. 2016, I'm telling you, is an absolutely amazing year for movies. We're not even halfway through the year, and there have been so many stunning works of art in cinemas. You guys, thank you so much, as always, for tuning into my channel. I love doing this, and I love the little fan base that I'm getting. I've been interacting with people from all parts of the world that I've never been to, and it's just great. I can't tell you how great interaction with my viewers from all over the world, how great that has been for me and my recovery. I love it. I love making these videos. Thank you so much for the support. If you like what you see, please subscribe to my channel. Take care of yourselves, keep in touch, and be well, everybody. Bye!